At the end of 2020, there were around 82 million forcibly displaced people in the world. Many of them were Muslims. More than 50 countries on this planet proudly identify themselves as Islamic. Muslims make up about 24% of the world population, and even then, over the past few decades, the community has single-handedly contributed to the global refugee crisis. Islamic fundamentalists vow to emboss extremist ideologies on Western societies. Ironically, they are the first to flee their devastated homelands plagued with the same disease. What is the reason that Islamic fundamentalists aspire to preach their religion across the globe but vehemently hate those countries that offer them the same? What's the reason that the Muslim immigrants strive to make their way to the Western non-Islamic countries while clinging to their own religious principles at once? Hi and welcome. This is TFI English, the national socio-political analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I'm your host Atul Mishra, and in this video I will tell you why Muslim immigrants prefer non-Islamic countries to migrate to rather than choose one of the 50-odd Islamic states that share the same ideology as they do. Let's begin. The forceful takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban has sparked fears worldwide that it could spur a humanitarian disaster in the region. As what happened following the onset of a civil war in Syria in 2011, it is believed that this crisis could exacerbate the immigrant crisis in Europe and the USA. Data shows that most of the refugees displaced across the borders come from Muslim countries. Muslims across the world are increasingly aspiring to settle in Western countries despite having more than 50 countries that identify themselves as Islamic nations. A report by jcpa.org shows that around 166 million people, largely Muslims, are willing to emigrate into the United States. Also, around 46 million are willing to emigrate to the United Kingdom and 39 million to France. This speaks volumes of the fact that Muslims across the world prefer non-Muslim countries to settle in. Except for some rich Arab countries, Muslim nations across the world lack resources and means to house a large number of asylum seekers. However, the Arab countries are also keeping away from opening their doors for Muslim immigrants following the mass immigration post the Arab Spring. Western nations are rich and offer better living conditions to asylum seekers from Muslim-dominated poor and developing countries of Asia and Africa. However, there's certainly more to it than what meets the eye. Muslim immigrants are widely accused of waging cultural wars against their host nations and have become a target among the conservatives of the host communities. It is believed that Muslim migration is deliberately used as a kind of Trojan horse, being part of an organized invasion of Muslims into the West. There are also some cases in which this mass immigration is weaponized by some countries, notably Turkey, to fulfill their geopolitical goals. Islam is the fastest growing religion in Europe, primarily due to immigration and higher fertility rates among Muslims. With the Middle East and the African continent in a constant state of turmoil, immigrants from Muslim countries like Syria and Libya have started to appear in numbers in Western Europe, especially in Germany, France, and Belgium. However, in some countries such as France and Sweden, the Muslim share of the population is exorbitantly higher. And according to Pew Research Center projections, in the coming decades, the Muslim share of the continent's population is expected to grow and could more than double. By 2030, people of Muslim faith or origin are predicted to form about 8% of the population of Europe. The concerns about Islamism go well beyond terrorism. A pattern has emerged where non-violent Islamist groups, while largely operating within the boundaries of the law, propagate an interpretation of Islam that drives a wedge between Muslims and non-Muslims, contributing to polarization and harming integration. The world's Muslim population is expected to increase by 35% in the next 20 years. Hence, the Western world is expected to become a major breeding ground for the community. Due to mass migration and higher fertility rate among Muslims, the number of Muslim ghettos has sharply gone up in recent years. This results in the growing isolation of the white majority from minorities in urban zones. The people, largely Muslims, dwelling inside these neighborhoods or ghettos essentially live in a parallel world. These ghettos also become the breeding ground for terrorists that pose a severe security threat to the national security of the host nations. Anecdotal evidence strongly suggests that in the decade after 9/11, a growing number of violent Islamic converts have been considerably involved in terrorist acts. For instance, when the World Trade Center towers collapsed, major paradigms decisively shifted. Thousands of American citizens of the country that had been the victim of the attack converted to Islam within months after 9/11, most likely to demonstrate disagreement with the public mainstream. All the democratic countries offer special incentives and perks to their minority communities in order to ensure their welfare. The Muslim immigrants often aim to settle in these countries to enjoy these benefits that they would never be offered in the Muslim countries. The global Muslim society is highly divided. The Islamic world is heavily embroiled in the sectarian conflict of the Shias and Sunnis. For example, the minority Hazara community in Afghanistan often finds itself as the constant target of Sunni Taliban fighters. The fact that the Muslim country of Bangladesh recently refused to house the refugees from Afghanistan speaks volumes of the fact that Muslim countries have no sympathy for Muslim asylum seekers. The Muslim community across the world is deeply entrenched in myriad conflicts, and the community has only exacerbated the global refugee crisis in the past decade. The Muslims, after getting imbibed with radical Islamic ideologies, make their way to the Western societies and plague them with the same. If the Western world wants to outlive this unobtrusive invasion, it needs to wake up to the rising threat of Muslim immigration into their countries.